Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Off the Rak, conversations on transformative leadership with yours truly, Walt Rakowich. And if you're new to the show, first of all, thanks for joining us. And if you're returning, welcome back. Today, I'm thrilled to have Mike Nolan on the show. Mike attended the University of Oregon and was a 3-year letterman in football and starter at safety. He began his coaching career at his alma mater, University of Oregon, where he was a graduate assistant. Then from there, he was a linebackers coach at Stanford and defensive line coach at Rice University, and then linebackers coach at LSU. Then he made the move to the NFL, where he coached for 33 years and 10 teams, almost a third of the NFL. He was head coach of the San Francisco 49ers from 2005 to 2008. And was on the coaching staffs of, hold your breath, the Denver Broncos, the New York Giants, Washington Redskins, New York Jets, Baltimore Ravens, Miami Dolphins, Atlanta Falcons, San Diego Chargers, New York Saints, and last but not least, the Dallas Cowboys. Boy, is that a mouthful, Mike.
Yeah, that's a few teams. Yeah, my wife always says, it'd be nice if she had a husband that could keep a job.
That's great. So then last year he returned to the head coaching position in the USFL for the Michigan Panthers. And so to say Mike knows leadership on and off the field is an understatement. And so, Mike, I'm really excited to have you on with me today and to chat about your experience with our listeners. Really, really great to have you on.
Thank you, Walt. I'm excited to be on. I really am. It's leadership has always been a fascinating, interesting thing to me, and I know it is to you. And by the way, I really enjoyed your book. I thought it was outstanding. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Thank you, Mike. And I just want everybody to know I didn't pay Mike to say that. So, so Mike, look, Super Bowl is just a couple days before us. It's a rare opportunity that I get to ask somebody who's made professional coaching their life's work right after a big event like the Super Bowl. So I got to ask you, what did you think of this year's matchup?
Well, number one, I thought it was a great game. There was no question. I thought it was the best two teams in the NFL that made it to the very, very last. And that's not always the case, but they were. And I thought the game was really good. I was really impressed with both offenses in the game, both Kansas City and the 49ers. They stayed with their attack regardless of what the other team did in stopping them. And I think that's what you find in really good teams. They're not going to easily be talked out of what they do. And so I thought it was a really good game. It didn't surprise me that the Chiefs won. I thought that, we're going to be talking about leadership. And I thought that game was a great example of probably the best leader on the field taking his team to victory. And that's Patrick Mahomes. Look, there's other leaders on the field, but I would have to say, throughout the season, I think everyone would agree. I mean, he's a Hall of Fame player, and he came through in the end. So, like I said, I really enjoyed the game. I thought that they were going to win, but I thought it was going to be very close, like it was. And so it was quite a game. The thing that, obviously we're not talking football overall, but it was the overtime thing was interesting to me at the end, because the Super Bowl is the only game the entire season that both teams have equal opportunity to win the game. During the season, there's not that rule. During the season, there really isn't equal opportunity. It's, if you go down and score and you're the first team, you win the game. So that was kind of neat to see. Hopefully they do something like that for the regular season, because fairness is really what, it should be.
I agree. By the way, along those lines, not to be critical, because I think Kyle Shanahan's a great coach, but what did you think about the decision he made to take the ball first in overtime? Did you like that decision?
Well, I don't want to second guess him. I think most people would have done the opposite. The thing that got my attention was, though, the rule that there's equal opportunity in the Super Bowl is really not publicized very much. If you asked all the NFL players in the NFL, that you'd probably get half of them to know the rule and half of them not. Well, everyone should know that rule, but they don't. And so Kyle kind of made the decision, in my opinion, as if it was the old rule. In other words, if I go down and score a touchdown, game's over.
Yeah.
So I thought, again, when he made that decision, first thing that came to my mind was, he's thinking like a normal, like the other 6 months that are one way, and then all of a sudden, bang, it changes. And so that's what I kind of thought. And I don't know that that's what happened. I know he said that he discusses it with his people, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. But anyway, it was a great game. I don't know if you saw. I think saw today. There was over 120 million people watched the game, so it's the most watched game of all time. So,
wow,
that's just amazing.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Hey, so Mike, let's dig into leadership a bit. So in a Fox Sports interview that you did, I think it was last year or so, you said that good coaches a lot of times bring out the real confident personality in a player because they're confident in the job that they do, and because they feel like they're well prepared, and that's a goal of most team and most every team and every coach. And so my question for you, and we're talking to people that are watching this, that are focused on leadership, but how do you bring out the confidence in someone who has tremendous potential, but maybe doesn't see it in themselves yet?
I think the very first thing is you have to believe in the player. And you have to, the objective, I think, early is that not only do you want that player to know that you believe in him, but through the process, he's got to believe in himself. So if there is some doubt, and again, when a young player comes into the NFL, there is some doubt. Now they've been at the pinnacle of their career. They're the top dog most of the time. You get to the NFL, you've been the top dog a long time, but all of a sudden you walk into an environment where there's guys that are much better than you. And some of these guys, that's the first time they've actually experienced that. It's kind of like being the big dog in 8th grade, and then you go to high school and you're back to being a freshman and they're kicking you around. When you come in when you come into the NFL, there's a little bit of that for a young player. But I do believe as a coach, when you're trying to get it out of him, I think the fact that he sees you being there, trying to make him better, I think it's a belief thing. I really do. I think he needs to know that you believe in him, and then therefore he can kind of, again, he can become to believe himself. And obviously it comes through a lot of practice and things and competing with the guys that we're talking about that are his peers. But I think the belief is the big thing to start.
Yeah, you mentioned that he needs to know that you believe. So through some form of telling him or recognition or something like that, though, right? I mean, at the end of the day, he's got to know that you believe in him, right?
No question. And that comes through practice. There's an awful lot of time that goes into developing these guys.
Yeah.
And so through the course of that, there's practice, there's meetings, you're back in the meetings, you're back at the practice, you're back and forth. And there's several weeks and even months prior to getting on the field and actually playing in a game. So there's a lot of time to build that, what we're talking about, that belief in himself and also obviously in everything going on around him. And I think that's where a coach who really is just a teacher, I think that's where a coach has to do his best work, is trying to, again, get a guy to not only become a good player, but have belief. Look, some guys are so over the top on the opposite side of it. They think they're just great when they show up and they quickly get humbled. And then they got to start over.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I get it. We had one of the guys that was on the show actually it was just in January, is a guy named by the name of Chester Elton, who writes a lot about recognition. And he wrote this book called The Carrot Principle. And he talks about when leaders have a choice between using the carrot, which is recognition, or the stick, use the carrot. Always let them know that you're behind them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's very true though. I mean, that is true.
Yeah. All right. So one of the things I also talk about in my book is the importance of being a positive influence on people, Mike. And I love what you said in that same interview that I mentioned earlier. You said, making players better and helping them achieve their goals. That's what appeals to you. And you mentioned that earlier in this interview already. But you said, with all my experience, I think I can contribute to a young person's development. And I've tried to hire coaches that have the same goal in mind. So what are some of the ways that you try to connect with your players, so they feel your influence and they then aim to improve from game to game?
The first thing that comes to mind is definitely you got to be authentic in your intentions with the guy. I think that's really key. I think being transparent, which you talked about in your book, is huge. And I think both of these are probably the best two ways to connect with players. We do a thing that I think is, it's kind of funny because you talked in your book about the 3 H's, and I have my own little 3H, and it's in this context right here. But what we do is throughout when we begin the very first day, our meetings and stuff at training camp. But after the meetings are done in the evening, we spend a team building kind of thing, and we call it the 3 H's. And basically what we do is the coach is the first one to do it. But after that, a player will do it each night, and they change. And what they do is they get in front of the group, they sit in the front, and this is all with the idea of having team building, but it also brings out the leadership in guys. But each individual position gets together, and when you're in the front of the room, you have a choice. You can talk about a hardship that you think has shaped your life. You can talk about a hero that possibly has shaped your life, or maybe a highlight. Now, if those three don't work, then naturally we usually just have guys talk about their tattoos. But the objective is to get them in front of the room and to have them open up with the group so that we can kind of, again, they've got to come together. There's got to be some kind of a bond when we're all done. Otherwise, you really don't have a team. And so it's very interesting when guys get in front of the room and they start talking about themselves in one of these contexts. Like I said, whether it's a hero, a hardship, or a highlight, they pick out the one they want. And they'll talk for 30 minutes or more. Sometimes if it gets really long, they'll go an hour, but you'd be surprised. The hardships are the ones that are really the most eye-opening, because some of these guys come from nothing. And the way they've gotten to where they are is kind of interesting and fascinating. But they share themselves. And I think that's a great way for not only the coaches. Like I said, the coaches do it the first night, but it's a way for the rooms, like I said, because they do it positionally first. So there might be, a half a dozen or more rooms that are doing what I'm talking about on a particular night. But it really brings the room together. And in the process, through the course of doing this, I think the team starts to grow together as well. But it is, it's very interesting, because I know this, we did it last year, and I did it with my coaches. I told them to do it. And it was kind of neat, because when we got back for the evening meetings as a staff, boy, they were all in there kind of talking about their groups, and they were amazed at what some of these guys had been through and stuff like that. But each night a different player would do it. But I think it's a great way it's talking about transparency. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
And it's very eye-opening, and guys, they come to appreciate the guy next to them, because like I said, some of these guys have been through some pretty tough things. And it's also interesting when someone says who their hero is. When they talk about who their hero is, it tells them a lot about the person and what they view as being, important to them. Because typically that's what a hero is, somebody that's done something that you think, wow, that's, that means a lot to me. But so, that's a way we get to it.
So you sort of force them to kind of well, first of all, they share their own stories, but you're actually forcing them to listen to each other about what each other's stories are. And through that, you gain that connection that you're looking for.
You're exactly right.
Family connection, if you will.
Yeah. And when you can think about it, even if you're in a business setting and you're trying to get a group to come together, well, when they still they're kind of all fraction to begin with, until they know something about each other, when they're trying to get a business, something going as a unit for business, if they don't share anything common, I think it's harder for them to really open up in a room and talk about, the business aspect. Whereas if they were pretty close, like a family, they'd share things, very openly without any kind of feeling that, well, if I suggest this, somebody's going to criticize me or blah. They get their insecurities and their fear, as you called it, starts to come out. But when they do this, as it goes along, there's less and less fear among each other with the other teammates. And we've got anywhere from 50 to 60 guys, but through the process of about a month, it really starts to build some bridges between people. And like I said, it makes the rest of the year, you can kind of build on it and become closer and closer and closer. And it's a lot easier for everybody to communicate about things that are, some people typically would be quiet about.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great way of connecting. And you can use it in the business setting just like you can in the sports setting, for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, Mike, you coached a lot of really great players. I mean, that's a lot of teams, and there's a lot of stars in those teams, for sure. And you must have seen some amazing acts of leadership on and off the field over the years, I would guess. So are there one or two players that, especially we know their names, that stick out in your mind as real leaders? And what did they do that was so memorable? Maybe you have a story or two for us.
I do it. That's really the I would say being a coach in the NFL or really at any level. But you at the NFL for sure, you come across some extremely unique people because look at the percentage of players that come out of college, even that get the opportunity to be a professional football player or athlete for that matter is less than, it's like 0.001%. It's just really a unique bunch of guys. And you really get to, in my opinion, you get to witness true leadership and what it kind of looks like. Because remember this, it's not like you become a professional athlete when you're 20. What I mean by that is from the time these guys are 7 years old or even younger, somebody's all of a sudden said, oh my God, this guy's got something special. And they start to push him forward. Right. It's just like you hear about these leagues, that Nike has these camps where these kids are, 12, 13, 14 years old going to these camps trying to get, getting eyes on them because you can identify a lot of the guys that are going to continue to go up at a very early age. So my point in saying that is though, a lot of these guys have already been the so-called leaders as they've grown up. Now, they may not have had leadership qualities, but the thing that comes out, I think in a professional setting is when you have a bunch of guys that have all been leaders and they're all at the top of their game and they're professional athletes, competency. And what I mean by that is the guys that are typically the best players, for the most part, stand up to be your best leaders. Now, that's not always true, but it's pretty much, if you look at teams in professional athletes, in particular football, that's what you see. I'll give you an example. The other night, the Super Bowl. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes is an excellent leader, and it shows. And he's probably the best leader that was in that ball game from top to bottom on both teams, and it showed. There was a time on the sidelines where Chris Jones, the defensive lineman for the Kansas City Chiefs, gathered all the defense together in a leadership kind of a context and had a word with them because he felt they weren't really doing what they should have done to stop the 49ers. And so you see these guys stand up with it. But as a professional athlete, the thing that I've kind of identified 7 things that I think in the NFL that I've seen over the years with all the guys, and I'll mention some names here in just a moment, but these 7 characteristics to me were and some of them I kind of reflected in your book as well, because they were all listed in your book one way or another, but I think they're very true. And there's a lot of characters or attributes to a great leader, but the ones that I thought were number one was competency. You won't find very often in the NFL that somebody that's kind of a lower line kind of player or whatever is the leader. It just doesn't happen. And not for right or wrong reason. It's just that all these guys are so good that they're really looking for the best player to help carry them to where they have to go. And so competency is probably the number one thing on a team. So if you're looking for the best leader, that's what you're going to most often find. As I said, the best player for the Chiefs on defense is Chris Jones. He was the one that gathered them up. The best player on offense is Patrick Mahomes. He gathered them up. And so that was obvious in that game where their leadership was coming from. Number 2 is influence, which is a big part of your, transfluence as well. But influence is number 2 to me without question. The influence they have on the players around them is big. Accountability, trust. They're almost always inspirational. And again, I'm talking about the guys that I've had contact with over the years, and there's been many guys. They've all been these things. They've always been very positive. And the last thing, which you kind of touched on in your book, that I was really pleased to see that was in there, because I think it, in my experiences in the NFL, and that's faith. The best leaders I've seen in the NFL all had faith. It's, to me, what's funny about that is I always think of faith as as Jesus Christ used to always say, he said, fear not all the time. And that's part of faith. And these guys typically don't have any fear. They play the game without fear. Everything they do, if they have it, they don't show it. So those are the things that I thought really stood out, where I think stands out among professional athletes. And the one thing that is always a killer, and again, I hate to keep referring to your book, but it's because it was in there too, is selfishness. If somebody's got all those things I just said, but they're selfish, I've been around them. They're just temporary leaders. They do some really good things. Their team might be okay. They step up from time to time. But when it's really important, that selfishness takes over and they don't win. It's the damnedest thing ever. The best teams I've been with are without that selfishness. And the other ones, you have great hopes and you get there, but that selfishness will just tear apart the whole thing. So I've been very fortunate. Just to name some guys, from a coaching standpoint, I thought Dan Reeves and Bill Parcells are two people I worked for that were great leaders. They were great leaders in the NFL. From a player standpoint, I tell you that the greatest leader that I've ever witnessed, and I think he was probably the best defensive player that ever played in the NFL. That was Ray Lewis. Now I know off the field, Ray had some things with people that obviously he had some things occur, but on the field with his teammates, he was all those positive things I said, and he was the least selfish guy I'd ever been around from a standpoint from a team captain, just a leader. He was unbelievable. I got to be honest. I have to put aside anything that might have happened off the field, but I just know on the field, around his teammates, around his coaches, he was extremely respectful. He was a pleasure to be around, just a joy. And he was the one that really carried the Baltimore Ravens for about 15 years. That's how long he played for him. There's been some other players that were very unique, but again, like I said, they either had all those most of them had all those positive things I just said that I think were a big part of it. But the one killer was selfishness, and it was amazing. But because it was so evident, it really was. When you felt it and saw it, you thought, "Oh, this is going to hurt us," and it would happen. You know, you'd get to a big playoff game or a championship game, and you'd lose. It's tough, but anyhow, long answer to a short question. But
well, you coached Deion Sanders too, didn't you?
I sure did. And Deion is a name. Look, I've been fortunate to coach. I coached Michael Strahan, Ray Lewis, Ed Reed. I was on the staff with John Elway, Lawrence Taylor at the Giants. I coached. Drew Brees. I was on the staff at New Orleans just recently. There've been a lot of guys. Deion's one of those guys. Look, Deion was a guy that was very competent. He influenced a lot of people. He was very accountable for his job. Like I said, you could trust him. He was inspirational. He was all the things that I've already mentioned. And so I would definitely put Deion in that category. There's without question, he's one of those guys. Like I said, after 33 years and a dozen teams, as you've already mentioned, for me anyhow, I was fortunate to be around a lot of really just unique people. And it's a blessing, to be honest with you.
Last year,
go ahead.
No, I was going to say last year you coached the Defensive Player of the Year, Frank Ginder, right? And you said 4 players in the NFL. That's pretty incredible accomplishment. I mean, just but you mentioned in an interview once, Mike, that you've been blessed to be around the game all your life, that you love the relationships that are created. And you talked about trust a minute ago, and I'm going to zoom in on that just for a couple seconds, because I always talk about the importance of trust in business, and I do think that it's a currency of business. I'm sure sports, like you just said, is the same. Can you talk a little bit more, drill down to that whole mention of trust, and the importance of that, in your approach to coaching and leading?
Yes, and I'll say this, Walt, and this is the truth. The ultimate team sport that relies on trust is football. It's the ultimate team sport for this reason. You've got 22 players on the field. There'll be approximately 150 plus plays in a game. Those 22 players, of those 22, on any one given play, any one of those 22 can make or break a play. It's not just the guy with the ball or the guy that delivers the ball. For example, you could have a great play called and your left guard falls down, trips, or just gets flat thrown to the ground and whipped. And you had a perfect play, and all of a sudden some defensive lineman comes screaming through because of that and makes a tackle for a loss and ruins the whole play. So It's very important that player, that every player does his job. And so that's the thing for me with trust in football is it's extreme. The guys, it's easy for guys to see when every play develops And a guy knows if he can trust the guy next to him to do his job. And as the team builds and they come together, that is probably, I would say that's the number one component, trust in making a play work. Every single player has to do that. So as a football player, they learn what trust is all about real early on, because you can do your job, every play, or you can do it very well. And if the guy next to you is not doing it, the team suffers. And so your ability to trust or even help that player do well is integral, as far as the success of the entire team. So trust in all sports, but in football in particular, like I said, with so many players counting on one another for so many plays, trust is, if you want to teach your kids trust, put them on a football team, because they'll learn it. They'll learn it fast. It's it is, like, I don't know how many times you see it where a coach will even tell a guy, look, I know you're talented, but you're not going to play because we can't trust you. You know what I mean? You're gonna go try to sack the quarterback on a 4th and 1, and you're gonna open up a big hole and they're gonna run through it. I can't trust you. You know what I mean? You're doing things, but you're doing things. Like, if we can't trust you, a lot of times, and the reason, and I say that trust is so important, I guess it falls back to what I was saying a while ago about how you can see selfishness right away in sports. But I think it's directly related to the trust thing. So they go hand in hand, as far as making it go.
Well, and as I say, I think it's a currency of business. I really do. Those people that create trust ultimately really do succeed. Hey, Mike, I want to turn this conversation a little bit to challenges too, because I think adversity sometimes builds character in people through perseverance. And was there ever a time in your coaching career that you were faced with what kind of seemed like, insurmountable odds, and you're just, knee deep in something? And if so, did you get through those challenges, and how?
More than on one occasion. But the one that comes to mind the quickest was I had been 10 years with Dan Reeves in the NFL. And then I took a job with the Washington Redskins, and I left Dan. The reason I mentioned Dan and I left is because I felt like I had to kind of move on and do things on my own a little more, and not be under Dan's, supervision, so to speak, as much. And because I wanted to climb the ladder and be a head coach and things like that. And at the time I was a defensive coordinator. But what I didn't realize was how important Dan was to my success from the standpoint of, as the leader of the franchise, because I coached under Dan both at the Denver Broncos for 6 years and then at the New York Giants for 4 years. And Dan was such a strong leader with such a strong presence that really all the difficult, whether it's the media or the negative things that might be thrown your way as an assistant coach, never hit you, because Dan was such a strong leader. He took all the hits, and he made sure he took all the hits. And I kind of just thought that I wasn't taking hits because I was doing a great job. But the reality was, there was somebody at the helm that was saying, look, you don't touch my people, you could touch me. That was Dan. And so when I went to the Redskins, it was not that way. I found that leadership is not always that way. And we quickly came under fire. There was an ownership change at the Redskins after my first 2 years there, which were okay. The first 2 years was fine, but the third year, our ownership changed, and a guy by the name of Daniel Snyder came in to take over the franchise, and everything in the building immediately changed. And there was a real insecurity among everyone, because people were thinking they were going to lose their jobs, and it was just a bad environment. And from coaches down, like I said, there was very little trust. People were very, like I already said, insecure about their jobs. They thought they were going to lose them. So people were doing things that would selfishly watch out for themselves. And so that particular situation got worse and worse. The only thing good about it that makes me think we kind of came out of it a little bit is at about mid-season, some not so good things happened. Anyhow, I just remember putting my head down and saying, you know what, I'm just gonna make these guys as good as I can make them and see how far we can go. And we ended up going 2 rounds into the playoffs, and we really rectified some. We were not playing very well at the beginning of the season either. Again, when you have a kind of environment we had, it's hard to expect your team to do very well. And we fell into that trap. But by the end, like I said, we were one game away from the championship game. And I think it was due to the fact that not only myself, but many people just said, look, we're gonna, just put our head down and work towards the common goal of winning.
Yeah.
And so that happened. But boy, I can remember being hit in the face and just thinking, man, this is not the environment that I'm used to whatsoever. And the only thing we could do was try to change it from within, and just start with ourselves and try not to be a part of the negativity and the I'm looking out for my job. And that was not easy, but that was an eye opener.
Sometimes challenges cause you to dig deep, and we learn the most about ourselves during those times, for sure.
No question.
Hey, Mike, look, you've gained a lot of experience over the years. What advice would you have given yourself as a leader just starting out in coaching?
I would say work on your ego and don't let your ego get the best of you. And the reason I say that is because what I've learned as a coach and a teacher in my years now is that the pleasure and the joy and everything I get out of it is what I do for someone else. And early in my career, I loved the camaraderie and I loved all that, but it was about me getting better and me. And it was that way for a long time. And not until my later years did I really, and I can honestly say I'm getting ready to be 65, and I'd say I was about 60 when it finally dawned on me, all your thoughts just go into yourself and everything about you. And I've said that to my wife, and she always says, well, I never really thought of you as being, an ego. And I always think, man, I was an egomaniac. I just didn't let you know it. But but I would say that to a young person. I would say, look, early on, recognize, the true meaning of why you're doing it. And if you don't really see that it's because of others, then that's the path maybe you want to go down. But that was not the path I chose to stay with. So that's what I would say. I would say if you're, keep your ego in check if you're a young guy, and try not to be so obsessed with yourself. And it's easy to do now because, look, you get a lot of, and if you're in professional athletics now, you get a lot of attention. People love you. Now, sometimes they hate you, but, you make a real good salary and people just tell you you're great. And, you just keep walking around thinking, boy, I am really something, aren't I? And even though you may not show it, inside you're kind of feeling there's just too much me involved. And I think if you can break away from that, you could actually help others, and be a better coach and a better teacher than if you stay wrapped up in who you are.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. That's really the premise of my book, Transfluence. It's really not about you. It's about the influence that you have on other people. And Mike, you've been a great influence. You've been a great guest. And so I ask everybody, all of my guests, this last question, because it's about gratitude. And I do think that gratitude is important as a helpful daily practice. And to have an attitude of gratitude is critically important. So I want to just ask you, what are you most grateful for in your life, Mike?
I would say that I'm most grateful, like aside from my family, friends, and my trust in Jesus Christ, I'd say I'm most grateful for all the opportunities I had, good and bad, throughout the NFL. Because I'd like to think that even the bad things, I think everything happened for me and not to me. And I really believe that.
Well, I love that. And, Mike, I just want you to know I'm really grateful to you. I'm grateful that you came on the show today and, taught me a ton and hopefully taught some people tuning in a ton. And so I just want to thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Off the Rak. I'm so appreciative of your time today. So thank you.
Well, thank you. And I want you to know that your book just reinforced everything. I mean, to me, it was helpful to me from a reinforcement standpoint. We all need to be reinforced. And so the beliefs that I had, I thought the book was outstanding. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, Mike. Really do appreciate that. Yeah. Well, anyway, I'd also like to thank everybody who made the decision to join us today. Hopefully you learned a lot. And I hope you really enjoyed Mike's insights on leadership on and off the field. And I do encourage you to make sure that you keep an eye out for next month's episode that's going to be featured in my LinkedIn newsletter, which is called Off the Rak Plus. You're going to find previous episodes, resources, transcripts, and more. Next month, we're going to have Stacy Lewis on as our guest. Stacy is a 14-time LPGA winner and is this year's captain of the Women's Solheim Cup team. She is terrific, and she's going to have some great things to say about leadership on and off the course. And so you're not going to want to miss that interview. And until then, I encourage all of you to be human with one another and to find a way to have a positive influence on somebody around you each and every day. Thanks for joining us today.